about what?
I'm gonna be.
Sitting here speaking. Turn this baby on. We'll watch it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Louisville Bar Association for our Eviction Forum. My name is Kristen Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the LBA. Sorry for starting a few minutes late today, but we do have a great panel with us. One to join us in a few minutes, we hope, and we wanted to go ahead and get started. I did want to say, you know, we're having this forum today to be very mindful of where our community is right now, how raw emotions are right now, the difficulty that I think we're all experiencing. We felt like this was a really important conversation to have, and while we had these distinguished panelists, we wanted to take advantage of that. But you know, we do this fully knowing that our community is going through so much right now, and are mindful of that and our respect for that, and thinking about that as we have our conversation today. But we did want to take advantage of this opportunity to get these folks in front of the community and talk a little bit about the eviction process, some of the reforms that have been proposed, things we could do to change the process for the better, make it less dramatic. And we're excited to hear from everyone here today. Joining us, we have Rebekah Cotton. She's a senior attorney with the Legal Aid Society Volunteer Eviction Defense Program. We have Marilyn Harris, the director of the Louisville Metro Office of Housing and Community Development. And we have Judge Jennifer Leibson with Jefferson District Court. We will be joined by George Eklund, who is the Education and Advocacy Director for the Coalition for the Homeless. A little bit later, he's briefly detained. And I'm excited, we also have with us Bailey Loosemore, reporter for the Courier-Journal, who has a very in-depth background in housing issues of the community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bailey and our panel, and let's get things started. If you are watching live on Facebook, apologies for the delay, but we do welcome comments and questions for the panel. Please submit those in the comments on the Facebook Live, and we will make sure that those get up to the panel by the end of the time of the end of the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for being here and talking on this really important. Thank you for being here and talking about this very important subject. And I talked to most of you already about this in quite a bit. So kind of wanted to get started with Judge Leibson asking for people who might not be familiar. What is the eviction process like? You know, maybe if we haven't spent a day in court ourselves, we do describe like.
Sure, and I apologize, I'm a little under the weather, I don't have much of a voice, so pardon me for that. The cases are started by the filing of a petition that is sent by the landlord or the landlord's attorney. And then that will then get a court date that once there's a court date, which is right now running 4 to 5 weeks out, I think. I'm going to have 6 weeks out, and then we're really busy. And then once that happens, notice is sent not only by the landlord but the sheriff's and post notice on the tenant's door about their court date. In the meantime, George and his people are doing outreach to try and get people to attend the court date. We do offer Zoom as an option, and that's been wildly successful in getting people. When I did eviction court in 2014, when I first got elected, I might have 10 people show up all day. And for 3 dockets, and now I mean, a regular morning on Zoom, I might have 70, 90 people. I mean, it's just pretty, you can understand that people who are dealing with this issue, having to come down, to get to court, transportation might be an issue. The ability to just get on their phone and do it from their place, whatever, is much easier. So Despite what my sheriff say, I'm going to continue to use Zoom as long as I'm in that quarter. And I get negative feedback from them every day. They hate it, but I don't care. So anyway, one thing I was thinking, why are they opposed? Because they're old and crotchety. That's pretty much the bar. They would agree with that statement, so, anyway, so, once they come to court, then we try and work out a deal. We've, created something that we call a standard agreement, so if I enter judgment today, then the landlord, can come get a writ of possession in 8 days. Okay, so instead of entering the judgment today, a couple of years ago, I started doing what I call standard agreement, which is passing it for 7 days instead of 8. And if the tenant moves out in that 7-day period, then the landlord gets their property back. The tenant doesn't have an eviction on their record, and the landlord won. If it works, they don't have to file for a setup, which saves them money, saves them money for the cost of the petition, saves them because the landlords have to pay the movers to move this stuff out. So it's very expensive to do a setup on a landlord's part. So if it works, and if it doesn't work, they get to set out the date. So it's been very successful, I think. It's saved a lot of evictions. I think you would agree. So that's been very helpful, and I think almost all landlords are agreeing to it now.
My later question was some of the changes that have happened in the past couple of years, of course, the Zoom and the standard agreement. And just to explain, so that is an agreement where the eviction would be dismissed. It still might be on their record, but it's going to be dismissed, so it's not a guilty.
Correct. It's the same thing as if you have a speeding ticket, it gets dismissed. It still shows up on your record, but it shows the distance.
Okay.
That's the problem. We'll talk about that later. I'm sure when we talk about reforms, that's my passion about eviction expungement. But so if we have to enter a judgment against the tenant, then after that, the landlord can apply for a setup. And right now, the sheriffs who do that are running about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks out. So it's a long time for the date of the judgment until the date that the setup actually happens.
So I don't know if you want to use this or maybe Rebekah, but when people get that notice on their door, or notice in mail, whatever, of the 7 days, your 7 days to move or eviction to be filed. If the eviction is filed, there's quite a lot more time, I guess, that they could have potentially to make other arrangements, to move. I guess. So what would you like for interest to know, if you are worried about getting that notice, I guess there is more time, but you do need to be taking it seriously.
Yeah, so a lot of worry and stress occurs in the house of a tenant. You can imagine once they get served. A lot of times when they call, they think that they're going to be set out on their court day. They don't understand the process. So just being able to explain to them legally what their rights are and how, as Jennifer Leibson's just told us, how that process works, automatically starts to help them to calm down and to start working towards a solution. The thing I would say is that despite Legal Aid's extensive efforts and the 34 volunteer attorneys who do eviction defense with our program, hundreds of individuals go to court unrepresented every day. And it is astounding to me because we have made great efforts to get the word out. For the most part, if you're facing eviction on a non-payment, most likely you're going to qualify for legal aid services. But if you don't call us till your court date, or even after your first court date, there's less that we can do to help. And so that's something that I would like to see addressed. It's just that the community and lawyers in the community are always referring folks to legal aid for eviction defense. It is worth the call. We even have some funding that's not limited. So you're going to get some help no matter what if you call our office.
Because you brought up the volunteers who do the eviction work, and of course, the city has the right to counsel program. They have some funding for making sure that there is free representation for people of certain incomes. Can you describe what that program is, maybe how it's how it's changed, how legal aid is handling these cases, how it's going?
Well, initially, and I'll let my esteemed colleague also comment on the right to counsel. I was not a part of the formation of that particular ordinance and the rolling out of that, but I am a part of the team that's seeking to help people through that funding. And so we're not turning away eviction calls. And even if you don't income qualify, someone's going to give you advice. Someone's going to tell you what you need to know to get to the next step. And then you want to comment more on right to counsel.
So I'm Marilyn Harris. I'm the Director of Develop Louisville. The Office of Housing and Community Development is one department underneath me. And when the, let me start at the beginning. Pre-pandemic, we had recognized, the city has recognized that there is an eviction crisis in our community. We have what is commonly said twice the normal rate of evictions in our city than any other place in America. And so we took that to heart and we started doing some research, and we were ready to roll out this great pilot that would provide assistance to tenants who were in eviction court. And that was March 21st, 2020. And we got authority to roll it out, and March 22nd, 2020, the world shut down. And so we literally were kind of sitting on this program that we had been to eviction court, we had talked to legal aid, we had talked to the sheriffs, we had done a whole bunch of pre-work to get ready to roll out an eviction diversion program that, albeit was much more in depth than what we ended up doing after the pandemic hit, but we had the framework and the partnerships had already been established. And so as we went through eviction diversion during the pandemic, Metro Councilwoman Kathy Chambers Armstrong, who is a huge child advocate, really started to push this idea of right to counsel. And so in the middle of the pandemic, she was able to get right to counsel for women with children or families with, I think it's women with children, was the way it started. And that passed Metro Council and was rolled out. And then I will take 2 seconds to toot our horn a little bit. Louisville was the #1 spender in the country of eviction diversion funds. And whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure. That just means we had a lot of people we assisted. And we literally spent it faster than anybody else in the country. And as a part of that, the reallocation of funds came about from Kentucky Housing Corporation, who was administering the eviction diversion funds, the eviction emergency rental assistance program is what it's technically called. And so they were administering it for Kentucky, but they did not meet their expenditure threshold. Now Louisville had already expended all of their funds. And when they did not meet the expenditure threshold, they gave a voluntary reallocation of $32.5 billion back to the city. And so Treasury agreed with that and gave us $32.5 million. And so as a part of that, we reached out to legal aid and we said, hey, we want to fund a couple, we have to spend all the money by December of 2024. So we reached out and said, hey, we want to provide eviction legal aid services to anybody in court, not just women with children. So at this point, we have a contract with legal aid to provide legal services to anybody in eviction court that needs those services. So that's really how we got to, long story, but that's how we got there. I think it's important to understand that if we hadn't had that reallocation, we would not have been able to fund that. So we funded that with the reallocation.
They keep the microphone with you actually.
Can I just say one more thing about right to counsel? Legal Aid's housing unit went from 2 attorneys in the heat of COVID to 8. Everything, the face of eviction defense has completely changed in Jefferson County. The number of attorneys that work as in-house attorneys, and then The funding from LSC for the grant for volunteer eviction defense has produced 34 more attorneys who take volunteer cases. So we're expanding, and the LBA is working with us to just make sure if someone wants representation in eviction court, there's someone to take that case. So I just wanted to say the right to counsel funding is working. It's producing the result of having a trained bar that can do this kind of work. And all that training is free and available on the Legal Aid website. And if you are interested in eviction defense, you need to call me because we have cases for you and it's great trial experience. So I just wanted to say about right to counsel, it's not fictional representation. It is literally producing the desired result.
Question that I have one now, off of that, I'm not sure if who would like to answer it, but, do you have any, I guess, data or maybe anecdotal information on how many more cases now are being dismissed than they previously were? I guess, is the representation having an effect that way?
Well, I don't think the current, for 2022 is available. George, who will be here, does have the data on what the cases were. He is,
Well, I only know this because we're applying for a grant from the National Center for State Courts currently for a social worker to work in eviction court. And their job will be to hook up, they will be in court every day to hook up tenants with all the community services that are available out there, because these people are at what is probably the worst point in their life. And they're in over their head. And so the ability to have someone say, here, this agency can help you with what, you know, what are your issues? Is it housing? Is it whatever the issues are? This person will have a great knowledge of what's available in the community and can refer them to the right agencies. Because if you call the numbers, you get 12 different, you know, referrals, and these people, they just get frustrated and they put their head in the sand because it's too much. So we're applying for so last year, 2022, there were 16,000 and change. I think if you want the exact number, I have it on the phone, 16,000 approximately petitions filed. And there were judgments in just over 4,000. So 1/4 of our cases. Whereas before, when I did eviction court before the legal aid was really active and we had the right to counsel. I mean, I think we probably signed 90% of all our judgments. And I think they changed a huge difference.
I can add one little tidbit to that. If you're represented, your chances of a dismissal go up to like 99.5. You have to work hard as a tenant to get an eviction judgment if you have an attorney that's taking you down the path. And I know that even our volunteer eviction defense program attorneys who are very new to the court and have just taken basic training, they have an 80% success rate at getting a dismissal for tenants. So again.
Yeah, that's really good news. It seems like we're on the right track.
ultimately, what we'd like to see is the evictions not even filed, right? So that would be the ultimate goal, is not to have this filed. And so that $32.5 million that I just referenced, we also provided some of those funds to a mediator. And so we hired a mediator who will be opening up, she opened it April 3rd, a program that, you know, we have to work with landlords, and some of the landlords over the past 2.5 years, I guess the past 2.5 years, some of the landlords have been really cooperative and really wanted to participate and really were advocates for the eviction aversion. What we saw in the beginning was, well, we had an eviction moratorium, so everybody accepted the money, right? I have money, you want to get paid, you're the landlord, everybody accepted the money. And then once the eviction moratorium ended, several landlords failed to accept the money. They just said, I don't want the money, I just want this tenant gone. And we've got a really tight housing market. And so if I'm renting the unit for $900 and I haven't paid in 6 months, and you can evict me because I haven't paid you, and you can get that either through a mediated move-out, a standard agreement, or an eviction, and then you can rent that unit for $1,250. A lot of landlords are taking advantage of that and doing that. And so I would say that one of the things that we need to do is we need to look at our new ULTA, the Uniform Residential Landlord Tenant Act in the state. And we thought we had a really good option. We really were like poised to institute kind of a workaround, because the way that the ULTA for the state of Kentucky is written is it says, and I am not an attorney, let me just say I'm not an attorney, but I have studied this thing inside and out. And what it says is essentially that you can either adopt the entire ULTA or you cannot as a city. You either adopt it or you don't, but you can't make any law that is any more strict or any looser than the ULTA. You either adopt it in whole, you cannot adopt it in part. So what we wanted to do was form our own ULTA, have Metro Council make our own Louisville Landlord Residential Tenant Act, and then pass an ordinance to rescind the Kentucky ULTA and adopt the Louisville ULTA, kind of all one fell swoop. And unfortunately, Kentucky state law does not allow us to do that. So we have to attack this from the state level. We have to look at ULTA. And quite frankly, if they just remove that one sentence that says you adopt all or in part, we could then, as a city, adopt our own Uniform Residential Landlord Tenant Act that would put our tenants on a little more fair playing ground. I mean, when we look at it, there's, you know, when they do have a set out, the landlord doesn't have to protect that property. It gets set out on the street, and then the neighbors come by. It's just really disheartening. Neighbors come by and just pick through those people's stuff if they can't sit there and watch it, because the landlord is not required to secure it. The landlord is not required to put it in storage. You know, even the tenant would have to pay for it to get it out of storage, but we don't have that. So there's these gaps that could be beneficial for our tenants. You know, there's a 7-day, the law is 7 days. And, you know, some states are 14 days. So there are some things that the state of Kentucky could do to put our tenants on a little more solid footing and level the playing field, because quite frankly, the playing field really is geared toward the landlord. I'm a landlord. I get this. I have been a landlord. I've done property management. But what I will say is that when up until we had money, right, up until the COVID money came, you walked into eviction court, there really wasn't a lot for that tenant. They literally would walk in, and as Judge Leibson will tell you, it's not about anything except possession of the property. And that's what tenants don't understand, because they'll say, have you paid your rent? No. That's all the judge has to hear, because that's the issue. If you haven't, as a tenant, upheld your part of it, it doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter that the furnace doesn't work, that the electrical is cut off because the landlord's ticked off at you. It doesn't matter that, you know, they locked you out of the house. If you haven't paid your rent, that's all the judge, following the law, that's all they have to have. And it doesn't matter if it's 38 cents you haven't paid or $3,800. That doesn't matter either. It's not about money. It's about who has the legal right to hold possession of that property. And if you violated your lease, unfortunately, the judge's hands were tied. And so for the last 2.5 years, we've been really lucky to have judges in court who really had compassion and understanding and really recognized that we needed to help our tenants more. And so
I'll just tag again on that. Every time I do public speaking, I want to say, tell every tenant you know, keep paying your rent and call legal aid. Your furnace is gone, a major issue is happening in your house, keep paying your rent and call legal aid, because there are protections in place if you continue to pay under the lease. So I always get this question, well, I shouldn't have to pay because there's a hole in the floor, and I literally sat in court, and the judges hate this too, like. One eviction that we had, the little family testified that they had 2-year-olds in the house, and there was a hole in the floor, and they were falling through the floor, and they were still evicted. So I just tell them, tenants, pay your rent and call us.
Welcome, George. Hi, George. Thank you for being here. I would like to ask you a few questions around this, because we talked a little bit about how it works, and we started getting into some of the reforms that I think people would like to see here. But I do want to ask you, because you work also directly with people who have been going through evictions, what are the short and long-term impacts that an eviction can have?
Okay, so yeah, it's an all like encompassing process where your whole life is getting uprooted. And so like in the short term, you're looking at like stress, like not knowing where you're gonna end up, like the fear of like ending up homeless. Like literally a woman called me today on my cell phone. I don't know how she got it. Numbers out there. But she lives in Bolton County, her landlord decides to terminate the lease. She's due out of the house in 30 days. Like the amount of stress that she was holding in that moment. And it's just how can you like move beyond that moment and like thrive? Like short-term stress and just not knowing it. In the long term, how we use eviction records like unnecessarily keeps people homeless in the long term. Like landlords use different screening criteria, and many use like if you have any eviction on your record, you're denied housing. It's a binary state. It's like you either have it or you don't. And if you have it on your record, it will push you into lower quality housing. It'll push you towards private landlords that may or may not be doing things above board. So yeah.
Thank you.
Which is why we have to pass eviction expungement. We have to. It is unbelievable and intolerable that we as a Commonwealth allow all misdemeanors and Class D felonies expunged off people's records, and we don't allow the civil eviction to be expunged off people's records. It is affecting people's lives for literally the rest of their lives, not just for a little bit, okay? But this is the civil equivalent of having a murder on your record that's dismissed, okay? Well, yeah, it's dismissed, but you were still charged with murder, and if you think that that isn't going to raise some eyebrows, you're wrong, okay? So we have got to do better, and the legislators that think that it's not important. I wish that they could spend a day in the life of one of these people that have been through this, and they would see that they can't live the life they want to live. Having expungement on the record, we've got to pass eviction expungement. It's inexcusable.
So Marilyn was bringing up your alta, and I believe what you were saying was in the state law, cities can either adopt it in full or don't adopt it. There's no taking for it. So I guess what exactly would you like to change in your alta, and what needs to be done to really get state legislators on board with this?
Well, that's a loaded question, Bailey. I think, first of all, I'm not opposed to the state legislature literally leaving you all to the way it is and taking out the line, one sentence that says you either adopt in whole, or you can't, either in whole or not, and no other, it's a whole paragraph. But if they would remove that one sentence, the city of Louisville can look at our population and say, hey, these are the things that we need for our citizens. We need their stuff protected, because not only when you set their stuff out, do people pick for it, the wind blows, and now stuff and garbage. I mean, it's a bigger problem than just somebody's stuff, which is a huge, tremendous issue. But now we've got litter and debris on the street, and it'll sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks until somebody comes and cleans it up. So then Public Works comes out and has to clean up the garbage that's been left on the street.
In some non-Gibraltar jurisdictions, the landlords are required to put it in a safe, like in a storage.
Right.
Unit or two, no, not in other places, like 2 weeks or something, like giving the tenant time to find a place to move it to, so that their stuff is secure in that period of time.
That's okay, let George.
Yeah, I think for us, like, we want flexibility.
Yeah.
Like, our volume is about 17,000 filings each year. In places like Pendleton County might have 100 on a very heavy year. But some counties, it's like half a dozen evictions each year, like they just don't see the volume that we have. I think other opportunities would be like a truth in renting law or ordinance where landlords can't just take application fees knowing full well that they're gonna deny somebody. They have to like produce like these screening criteria. You know, we had a client who's sleeping under a bridge. He spent $600 trying to get into housing just on application fees. I mean, that's something that I think the curb law, like how we deal with people's property, and I think just the timelines and how do we make sure that people have an extended amount of time to cure like any kind of back pain in front. Those would be on my list.
I think another thing that we could do in Kentucky that would be very beneficial is, so in Kentucky, landlords cannot accept partial payments without having to start the clock all over again. And having been a property manager in Illinois, Tennessee, and Kentucky, I can tell you that in other states, landlords can accept partial payments. And that would be very beneficial. I can't tell you how many people have called our office and said, I owe $2,300. I have $1,500 of it. I only need $800. And so if we could fix the law that those partial payments could be accepted, that would be awesome. I mean, things like that that give the landlord, and I know that's kind of taboo, but give the landlord the ability to still keep their sort of control over the situation, but also work with the tenant, because some tenants get paid every 2 weeks, right? Those people get paid every 2 weeks. It would be a lot easier for a landlord to say, hey, I'll accept your payments, you know, if the rent's, you know, $1,000 a month, I'll accept 500 the 15th and 530 or, you know, on your pay period. And they don't do that because if they accept the first portion of it, then they can't start if they don't get the section, then they can't, the second portion, then they can't. So there's, you know, there's some things there that could be beneficial for tenants and for landlords. The putting stuff in storage, also enforcement of a unit that doesn't meet housing quality standards, that isn't a standard unit, you know, where that talked about the hole in the floor. That's a no-brainer. I mean, that landlord shouldn't be able to rent that piece of property, let alone evict someone from that piece of property. So maintaining the housing, as George said, a truth in lending, you know, they're taking the application fees, but a lot of landlords are taking money for a unit that is substandard, and they know that, right? They know that. We came across a woman about 1.5 years ago who was being evicted from a boarding house. And she was being evicted because she had had a stroke. And she could no longer climb the ladder to the attic where her bed was. And so she asked the landlord, could I have a room on the first or second floor so I don't have to climb the ladder? And he said no, and then he proceeded to evict her because she was on a week-to-week basis, and the week was up and she needed other accommodations, and they evicted her. And I mean, those are the kind of calls that George and I have listened to for the last 2.5 years, and they are heart-wrenching. They are just, and so knowing that we have landlords out there who are renting the unit, you know, they literally take advantage. And so, you know, I'm in the city, so we send out code enforcement. What does that do, right? They get a fine. You know, we shut them down, and it's a game of cat and mouse. We shut them down. We do what we can. They open it back up. So
I had one this week where there was a tenant who was a Section 8 tenant. Section 8 has to do inspections for their tenants. And the property failed every single checkbox on the inspection, whatever you want to call And so section 8 stopped paying because the landlord has to be up to code for section 8 in order for them to pay. So section 8 stopped paying because the property wasn't up to code, so the landlord turns around and fixes the tenant because their property is up to code. So that's what's going on.
Thank you all for sharing that. So I know that we talked about the state, what the state can do in regard to development, but I think that the city can also do some different programming and some of its policies, passing word to council, doing the preventing discrimination against sort of income, which is not allowing people not to accept section 8, or to turn people down, they have section 8. I guess, is there anything else that the city can consider passing or programs that the city could do to prevent eviction?
So when I first started the coalition, like I went to a meeting, we were gonna talk about eviction prevention. There was like 5 people there. We all kind of brooding and angry and throwing our hands up to say like there's absolutely nothing great. The net gain from COVID for our city is like we have taken like this big opportunity and made like huge leaps forward in terms of programming and accommodations for people that are very low income standards of housing. So I think continuing the path that we've been on is say, we need to have a robust mediation program. We need to figure out how can we expand right to counsel. We need to figure out how can we institute a permanent like emergency rental assistance program with utility assistance. Like the deposit program that like area community ministries manage, we manage, Louisville Urban League manages now. Like these are all tools to give people off ramps to that day where the terror comes to set out everything. I mean, so I think just continuing the trends of what we've been doing is where we're at.
I want to see us increase our capacity even more to have every tenant represented in court that wants an attorney. And that's my job at Legal Aid. It's the pro bono program. We have continued to recruit. I tell people, anyone can do this. We have trainings online. If you are licensed to practice law and you live in Louisville, Jefferson County, you can go on the Zoom. It's the easiest pro bono work you will ever do. You don't even have to go to court. You can just go on the Zoom. You can call your client. Everything is set up to make access to representation just as easy as possible. And so if you're listening, you know attorneys, or you're a part of a firm that's looking for pro bono opportunities, this is just the volume is there. There's once you learn it, you'll be able to give back to your community. Hopefully not indefinitely, it'll be this volume, but this is a great place to kind of grow that. And that's, this is our city too. The attorneys in this city, we should take responsibility. And that it's really kind of sad. We've done some research on pro bono in Louisville. It is sadly not where it should be. And I know attorneys are overworked and they're busy and they all have these massive dockets. But one case a year, like you're making, as George described, one person's life, the hardest moment they'll ever face, you're helping them in that moment. It's so rewarding. And it's true. We have clients check themselves in. We have clients, I never have a day without tears on the other end of the phone. It's devastating emotionally. So that's my plea.
Some of the things, as George said, there were 5 people. Well, that group has grown, and it's probably 50 people now. George has coordinated this weekly, or used to be weekly, now it's monthly meeting of this group of stakeholders, and it's a bunch of community service providers. State representatives attend. I mean, it's a big group of people. And so the main discussion is, how can we make the changes that we implemented during COVID permanent? So George's group at the Coalition for the Homeless have literally been knocking on doors of tenants who were going to be evicted. And so what we, before they started knocking on doors, we're like, well, we'll call these tenants. And then we realized the form from the Administrative Office of the Courts doesn't have a phone number for those tenants. And landlords are not required to put the apartment number. So sometimes the sheriff will just post it. You know, there's maybe 16 units in a building, and they'll just post it on the front door of 16 units, and that tenant may never see it. You just don't know. There's no phone number, so we couldn't call them. I can tell you that the judges have been amazing, because what they will do is they'll call the tenant on the phone. If they have a phone number, the judges will literally call and say, hey, Marilyn, you're supposed to be in eviction court today. You know, why aren't you here? They at least are making that attempt to reach out. So as part of George's group, we reached out to the administrative office of the court, and yesterday we were told that form is being revised, and we're gonna have phone numbers, and we're gonna have an optional email address on that form for community people to get a hold of these tenants. So George's group, you know, our Office of Resilience and Community Services, anybody that we need to try and get these people on the front end before they show up in court, because when they show up in court, they're petrified. I mean, if they show up in court, they're petrified. And so at the beginning of COVID, we had what was called a green sheet. It was a bright green piece of paper, and it literally said, if you have to go to court, it was Tina Ward Pugh, bless her, because she managed to coordinate with the sheriff's office to actually stuff the envelopes that green sheet would be in, so that when they got served, they got this green sheet that had our phone number, that had George's phone number, you know, community area ministries phone numbers, you know, all of those things. The other thing that happened at the beginning of COVID is the greatest name ever, stopmyeviction.org. It is literally the greatest name, and it is a Louisville-based eviction diversion, and that's where you can get all of the eviction diversion services in one spot. So you can link up with the coalition, you can contact the Office of Housing, you can get a hold of RCS, you can get into the mediation program, you get legal aids information. There is a one-stop shop, and so I think Claire Wallace, if you don't know that name, you should. She is the vice president of the area community ministries, and an amazing person. And her and Alicia Ariani started this website. And so we have done all these things that we intend on keeping for the long term, because they've made such big strides. As far as what the city can do, we're funding the mediation. We're funding expanded legal aid representation. But the fact of the matter is, we're funding that with this eviction or emergency rental assistance funds. And those funds expire December 31st, 2024. So that's like, you know, 17, 18 months from now. And so how are we going to tackle that in the future? And how are we going to fund it? We could easily, as a city, spend $10 million a year on eviction prevention through assistance with rental assistance. We easily 10 million. We went through 10 million in 2 months. In the beginning of COVID, yeah, that is important. I did tell y'all we were the best at spending. We've spent $134 million in rental assistance for citizens in the city of Louisville, helping over 45,000 households stay housed. So that's a huge amount of work, and it was work from everybody up here. It was the judges saying, hey, wait a second. You really just want to get paid, right? You don't really want this tenant cost. So it's every single person. It's all the attorneys that came in from legal aid. And I can't remember the little guy's name. It's always in court. Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he was there every single day posting, if you need legal aid services, and he would pipe up every single day. I mean, it's all these people that just pitched in together to make something amazing happen in the city. And if we don't find a funding source for it, it's going to go away. And we are coming up on a tight budget. We've already been informed that our budget's going to be tight this coming year. The mayor is getting ready to make his budget address in the next couple of weeks. And so over the next couple of years, if we don't find a funding source, some of this good work is at risk of dying.
Which is why we need more pro bono attorneys.
Does the green sheet still happen?
Yeah.
It's not green anymore. But
It's gone through about 17 versions.
very professional.
So yeah, when we were giving outreach, we tried to get 3 sessions. So everybody who gets on the docket gets a postcard sent to them, like the week that they're filing. We used to physically drive to people's homes, just to say, hey, apply for rental assistance, show up in court, go legally. That was the general gist of it. And then, we are still working with the sheriff and doing a full print job with one of the companies here in town, just that they have a stack of 10,000 ready to go, and they're not always waiting for it to bring over 200 or 300 at a time. So, yeah, that average is still there. It would be great to have phone numbers and just quick text, a quick phone call, just to let people know, hey, you have court, you need to reach out now.
Yeah, because right now, for me to get a phone number, I'm dependent on the landlord giving it to me, and I don't always believe the landlord when they tell me that they don't have the phone. Put it that way.
Well, you have to wait. There was a question that you made online. You or Marilyn, but someone did ask about the mediation program. So who exactly will be responsible? How will that work?
So the mediation program, we awarded the contract to restorative. No, I can't remember. It's she's in my head. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Her name is Shannon Floyd, and it's her practice. And it opened up on April the 3rd, and a landlord has to be willing to participate. And there is rental assistance with it. So if the tenant is just delinquent rent, then the landlord and the tenant and the mediator meet. And it's before they file an eviction. So it's pre-eviction filing, which is really key because we want to keep these evictions, even if it's dismissed, we want to keep it on the record. So they will meet, and within a 2-week period of the initial contact, they'll meet. And if they can come to a mediated resolution, they'll execute a mediated, agreement, a mediated settlement. If it includes rental assistance, we'll pay the rental assistance from the Office of Housing and Community Development. If they cannot come to a mediated resolution, the landlord then gets put on the next Friday's docket. So there is kind of a carrot and stick that the landlord doesn't have to wait 4 weeks out. They are in the queue, and if they can't, if the landlord and the tenant both come and they both just can't figure out a mediated way, which hopefully won't occur, that landlord could get that case on the next Friday's docket. Then the landlord's not waiting any longer to get into the eviction queue. And so that's really the carrot for the landlord is the landlord, hopefully will get a mediated resolution, landlord can get paid, the tenant doesn't have the financial burden kind of hanging over their head. And hopefully, there's a program and a way for them to get back on their feet and get caught up on rent and be able to remain in the house.
So they're gonna start with non-payment cases only, and then once those are kind of underdeveloped, they'll expand the program to include other reasons like violation of lease or other potential causes.
Do you have any other questions from the audience?
My name is Kate Crosby. I'm the president this year of the Bar Association. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you all for being here. Thank you for the passion and thought and the hard work that you all bring to your job every day, because it makes all of our community better. We're really, really grateful. My question is, as it stands now, for cities that don't adopt RLTA, what is the background on the law governing landlord tenant rights? It's just the contract or just the lease?
I believe it is just a lease.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Well, and KRS also has there's KRS that is parallel to RLTA. So
Got it.
They follow the KRS, which in some places is exactly the same as RLTA, and in some places it's not.
So it would default.
It would default to the KRS.
Then
Just 3 KRS chapter 3.
got it. Jefferson County has.
Yes, correct. But not many places have in Kentucky. We're definitely.
I think there's 5.
Yeah, we're definitely.
So besides the Zoom court, what were a couple of other major lessons that COVID showed us was possible for evictions?
It's the Zoom.
That's huge. That's the major one.
Starting to call tenants That's another thing the sheriff state that I do. Because they think people should be in court, and I get it. I mean, I get that that's their attitude. Because these are long older folks, and if you're in court, you should show up. When these are people in crisis, showing up isn't always an option. So if making a phone call, and sometimes I will tell you, and it's not unusual that I call them and they answer the phone and they say, I'm on the Zoom, but I can't unmute myself. So they're actually trying to participate and they just can't. So, it doesn't add that much time to court. I mean, some of the latest attorney may say it does, but that's worth it to me. Then if we can save a couple of actions by calling people, I'm gonna do. So I can't think of anything else really.
Any other COVID related lessons?
So I think another court practice that you all started was making sure that landlords were participating and like were being sworn in to say like, yes, this person does owe me this much money. Whereas before court or before COVID, that was never happening.
What prompted that? Like, why?
So,
Sorry.
We'll let legal aid into that.
I think what prompts it is someone else speaking up for the tenant, and rebalancing things. But I would say that just the attention on the issue of eviction has, people who aren't facing this aren't aware of it and, sort of live in this world where they just think everybody's has a place to live. And COVID just shined the light on this particular issue for legal communities and communities as a whole in a way that it wasn't before. And just this whole idea that everyone that's being evicted is refusing to work, that the tenant is blamed for this scenario that they find themselves in, regardless of the actual circumstances, the death in the family or the loss of the job or the whatever. And so COVID sort of shifted that to we're pulling this together. A lot of people lost their jobs. And it just, this could happen to anyone, just the rebalancing. So thank you.
One of the other things that occur now in court that didn't occur previously is that the judges are being very specific in saying, the tenant's not here. When was the last time you looked in that unit? When was the last time you verified that they're still there? Because what we saw was some tenants had moved out between the time they got served their eviction notice and the time they went to court. They just packed up and moved out. And they just said, well, I gotta get out, so I'm gonna go. So they didn't show up in court, but they didn't show up in court. And so the attorney would say, the judge would say, what do you want to do? And they would say, well, I want the eviction. So people had already moved out and they got evictions on their record because that check wasn't being done. So now that the judges say, okay, Marilyn, when was the last time you actually looked in that unit? So let's say it's a Monday. And I'll say, oh, last Wednesday. And Judge Leibson will say, okay, you go check that unit. If they're still in, come back tomorrow and I'll sign the order. And that has helped tremendously because George's group will go out and they'll knock on doors and they'll find that person moved out 2 weeks ago. And they can then give it to us. And so we have somebody sitting in court. And when that occurred, they moved out 2 weeks ago. Megan McGinn, who is sitting in court, Megan and Marie now sit in court, and George will relay that to our staff. And our staff will pipe up in court and say, well, Marilyn moved out 2 weeks ago. And so those evictions are not getting filed that shouldn't have been, that are not getting ordered that should have been not ordered previously. Did I say that correctly?
I think there might have been one other question.
Yeah, for one time, I want to ask just about the 2,400, approximately 2,400 raffle applications of unfinished, that transition and different topics. So if you have any comments on this.
I do. I can give you a complete update on it. So when Kentucky Housing Corporation didn't meet their threshold, they notified the city that they were going to reallocate $32.8 million. They did. And then they sent us a file and it really is not a file. Trust me, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So we didn't get the applications for all these households. We just got an Excel spreadsheet with phone numbers, emails, and addresses. So we then worked with the area community ministries and we tackled that. So some of those 2,400 cases were all the way back from May of 2022. And we got the list middle of January. And so we did a random search of the list from the cases that were May through, I think, September. We searched 140 of them. Out of 140, there were maybe 10 or 15 that were in court. The rest of them were not in court. And so we made an assumption that those cases were either tenant either moved out, they come. So that was kind of our first step. Our second step was everybody that had applied October, November, December, we sent an email to them and said, well, we did send it. Area Community Ministries sent them an email and said, hey, you applied for rental assistance at the state. We're here to pick up your application and help you get paid. So we sent that out to all of them. We processed all of those responses that we got from that initial reach out. And then we went back and we sent an email to everybody from May to September because we had funds available. So the people that had applied that we, worked in court but might have applied, we then reached out to them. At this point, I'm going to say we might have 150 applications in process, meaning they haven't finished them or they haven't submitted what they needed to submit, anything like that. And so we are working with the Office of Resilience and Community Services, who actually have a eviction mitigation program. But if the landlord is not willing to participate in that program, it is not funded through the same funds that we are dealing with. It's funded through Community Services Block Grant, and it requires landlord participation. So if a tenant is working with RCS and the landlord is not willing to participate, they get a letter of referral to us, and we will pay the tenant directly based on the application from RCS. So that we make sure we get assistance into the hands of the people that need it. So.
It was a very long way of saying they're getting paid, it's just taking a lot.
Yes, but I wanted to give you I wanted you to know it was methodical.
Thank you all for the prayers. I know we're right. So there was a comment, I guess, on the Facebook page that the Advocacy Law Clinic at the Brandeis School of Law is also starting a housing unit, getting free legal assistance. So if anyone is interested in that,
All of those cases are assigned through the pro bono program.
perfect.
And they do a great job, which proves any attorney can do it. You have clinic students getting them dismissed all the time.
And a lot of that work, if you sign up today, a lot of it is just making a phone call to the landlord's attorney and saying, hey, can my client in 2 weeks to get out instead of 1 week? And making an agreement to that effect. And you don't even have to have a hearing. You have a lot of it gets worked out that way. So nobody should be afraid to do that.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody again for participating today. I think this was a really fantastic forum. I think the information you guys gave us was incredible, and I hope this is just a first step to other ways that the LBA hopefully can be more helpful, making an impact with all the work you guys are already doing. I'm so appreciative of you sharing your time and your expertise. I super appreciate, George, that you spent a lot of time with me on the phone leading up to this event, so I would have a better understanding of what we were all here to talk about. And I hope everybody here will take this message out into the community and help us spread the word about ways we can make this process more fair and less traumatic for folks who are going through it. Just want to thank Marilyn, Judge Leibson, Rebekah, and George one more time. And thank you, Bailey, for participating as our moderator. And thanks for everybody who was watching online. This will be posted, it will remain on our Facebook page, and then it will also be posted on our YouTube page. So if you want to share it with anybody, you can send it to them, and we'd be happy for anybody in the community to check it out. Have a great afternoon.